their foundational religious beliefs that aid in coping methods in Africa. In other words, we are saying their foundational religious beliefs, that are critical when we are trying to understand indigenous psychology of the people. How did people cope? And there are four foundational religious beliefs that we have considered. One is a belief in impersonal or the mystical powers. Two is a belief in spirit beings. Second is a belief in divinities or gods. We don't like to use the word gods, but in a sense, you cannot evade it. The fourth one is a belief in the supreme being. That formed the religious psychology of the people, the indigenous African people. They are foundational because the mystical powers are something one cannot take rightly in indigenous Africa. The belief in spirit world, spirit beings, not necessarily world, the spirit beings is there. That's where ancestral spirits keep coming. The other one is the belief in divinities. The other one I've said, the belief in the supreme being. Looking at them one by one very quickly, one believe in impersonal powers or mystical powers, impersonal or mystical powers. Now, the first question is, what is the influence and impact of this dominant religious belief in impersonal and mystical powers upon the whole of traditional African life? Now, you note that even with these scriptural or books like Quran, Bible, and even in Christian theology, the whole belief of impersonal power is also there, and it's a dominant one. And it's still in the traditional African life, it is still a foundational belief that helps people in coping. Now, when you have those mystical powers that are beyond human, when we have such a belief, we are comforted. We are given like another court of appeal. We can appeal to the mystical world, the world which is more powerful than the world we experience on a daily basis. So, the belief in mystical powers or impersonal powers is a foundational belief that helps people to cope. And whenever people have challenges, there is a tendency to appeal to it. Number two, we mentioned the belief in spirit beings. We mentioned the belief in spirit beings. Now, the traditional African concept of reality and destiny are deeply rooted in the spirit world. So our destiny, the reality that we take, things that we take as reality, the spirit world is a reality to us, and it's rooted there. And so, belief in spirit beings is another foundation one. The activities and actions of the spirit beings govern all social and spiritual phenomena, because the spirit world can be divided into two broad categories. Number one, non-human spirits. Number two, the spirits of the dead. That's where we bring back the belief in ancestral spirits. whereby when good people die, or people who led exemplary lives, when they die, they actually don't die in the way we think of it. They become ancestral spirit, and they still become useful to us. They are part of the living. So if you read Jomo Kenyatta's quasi-religio-political book, Facing Mount Kenya, he wrote in 1938, he dedicated to his mother and father, Wambui and Muigai, and to the unborn and the dead, meaning the ancestral spirit. So you can see he typically, as a typical African, and writing at that time expressing the reality of African context, he saw family constituting of the dead through the ancestral spirit, because good people became ancestral spirit or mediators. The unborn are part of the African society, and now the living also, they are there. So you can see that is it. So non-human spirits are regarded in hierarchical order in accordance with their kind and importance, depending upon their power and the role they play in the ontological order in the spirit world. Now you may ask, what constitutes the spirit world? This is Biancato now summarizing it. The spirit world is full of spirits. It's abode with spirits that are numerous, such as all that is believed in, like reincarnation. There is, of course, most scholars will not use the ones used by this evangelical cattle, because of extremism in it. But it gives us a picture of issues to do with spirit possession, exorcisms were common or are common. There is also talks of evil spirits. There is also people who are spirit possessed. And there is also John Beatty, whom we take more seriously than any other scholar in this field. He talks of evil, good and evil spirits. Now, when we come to magic, there is black magic, which is nothing but witchcraft or uchawi or sorcery. And there is white magic, which is work done by the medicine men. They practice white magic, not black magic. There's a huge difference between black magic and white magic. So you can see, when we are trying to understand the psychology of the African people, basing it on their indigenous cultures, you'll be surprised to learn that you cannot keep away religion. Religion becomes very, very critical in understanding the African personality, the African worldview, the African way of living. Because if you think of culture, in Africa we say culture has 6, not necessarily Africa. We normally say culture has several pillars, and mainly the 6 famous, I call them famous pillars, including religion, economics, aesthetics, ethics, kinship, all that. Now, religion being part of culture, pillars of culture, permeates all departments of culture, or we can say all departments of life, so fully that you may not tell the distinction between religion and culture in Africa. So now, what are we trying to say? When we are talking about African psychology or African coping methods, we cannot ignore the spirit world of the African people, or the general worldview of the African people, which is densely populated with the spirit beings, spirits and the living dead, or the spirit of the ancestors. Now, the spirit world is the most pervasive worldview. Contained within it are the spirits, the ancestors, and the supreme being or God, all that. The other, the third foundational belief in African indigenous society is belief in divinities. Now, you may ask, what is the difference and impact of the dominant religious belief in the divinities upon the whole of traditional African life? Now, I answer this by saying African traditional religions in some parts of Africa have had an elaborate pantheon of divinities. But there are exceptions to this very general observation, especially in Southern Africa and Nigeria in West Africa. Some African ethnic groups do not seem to have divinities. We find them not just Nigerian Yoruba or Batara. The supreme deity is assisted by other divinities, and that is not very common. But you see, Bolaji Idowu, a famous Nigerian scholar, tells us that it is purely a monotheistic religiosity in West Africa. But